Hi, my name's Martin Andrews and I'm the chair of the Biodiversity Working Group here at the Met Office. This year, 2021, we are celebrating the 10-year anniversary of achieving the prestigious Biodiversity Benchmark Award for the work we do on site to promote biodiversity. The Biodiversity Benchmark Award is given by the Wildlife Trust on an annual basis. So every year they send an assessor on site to examine the biodiversity potential of our site and also how we manage the site as well. So this award in many ways is a testament to the hard work put in over the years to fundamentally make the Met Office site a welcoming home for wildlife and wildflowers. As part of our Biodiversity Benchmark Award celebrations, we are very pleased to welcome Harry Barton, the CEO of Devon Wildlife Trust, with us today. Harry, thank you for coming along and welcome to the Met Office.
Well, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here on this amazing day and to look at this incredible meadow that you've created. Wildflowers everywhere, insects buzzing. And it's such an example of great things you can achieve if you put land aside for wildlife like this. So congratulations.
So we're currently here in the meadow surrounded by butterflies, wildflowers and dragonflies. Now obviously wildflower meadows are important for biodiversity, but also hay meadows are as well. And I think about 100 years ago there were a lot more hay meadows and wildflower meadows across the UK, and it's reduced in number by about 97% according to the latest numbers. So in your view, what is important about wildlife meadows and hay meadows for biodiversity?
If you look at the site out here, you describe some of the wildlife, and if you get your eye in, you can see how complex the structure is. It's like a rainforest in miniature with life at every single level. And if you compare that with a heavily improved agricultural field, you're looking at perhaps one or two species, probably few insects because they get sprayed with pesticides a lot, and that is what we have traded our landscape for. So if you think about the sheer amount of habitat that's like this which has been lost and what it's been replaced by, we have got such a job to do to bring this back across the wider landscape. And it's great to see organisations like the Met Office taking the lead on this. We've got to do much more work, of course. We've got all our parks and our road verges and our roundabouts which are starting to change in Exeter. We need other cities to do the same. We need other companies and organisations to do the same. And we need to bring this right back across Devon's wonderful landscape.
So when we do the cutting of the meadow, we remove the cuttings away so that it doesn't rot down and put nutrients back into the soil. And it seems to be somewhat counterintuitive that low soil fertility is an important aspect for meadows. Can you explain why?
Well, this is a really interesting but critical point. We talk about poor soil fertility. I would say that most of our soils now across Devon and the UK landscape are far too fertile. It's like we've fed them far too much sugar and fats and other things that aren't very good for them. And what we need is to put them on a sensible diet so they get back to a really healthy state. And a healthy soil, just like a healthy body, will grow healthy plants and biodiversity. That's all we're doing here. So to call it impoverishing the soil, I think is a slight misconception. I think it's getting the soil back into a healthy state. And what you're doing is righting the wrongs of the past, and you're doing a brilliant job of it.
Clearly we have a large expanse of meadow here at the Met Office, but is this the kind of thing that people can do on a smaller scale at home in their own garden?
It's amazing what you can do in your own home. We're all brought up to think we should mow our lawns regularly and keep all the grass neat and clipped, a little like the grass under my feet at the moment. But actually, if you just leave at least parts of your lawn unmown for just a few weeks, it's amazing what the results can be. They may not overnight or in a few days look as rich as what we see in front of us. That can take years. But the benefits to insects and bats and birds and other wildlife in the garden is immense. And if everyone in the country put a bit of their garden aside and left it grow long, let it grow wild just for a couple of months, that would make a huge difference for wildlife.
So if people want to create a wildflower meadow at home, is it a good idea to buy seed mixes online or from the supermarket?
Well, I think the most important thing is to have the intention to bring wildflowers and wildlife back to your garden. And there are many ways of doing that. The simplest is actually just to do less, to mow less and leave areas alone. And in time, species will come back. Now, of course, if you do that, you can't be entirely sure what's going to come back. So you can help things along by bringing in seed. When you do that, it's always worth thinking carefully about where the seed comes from. So try and source seed that has been grown locally. There are lots of organisations that do that. But again, I would always say the easiest thing to do is just leave it alone and let nature lead.
So here we are at the two ponds near the main entrance of the Met Office building. And I have to say, we're really lucky to have water in our particular landscape. It's a really good place to come down to on a quiet, maybe a sunny day, and just watch the wildlife above the water and below the water. So if we look around, we can see on occasion kind of moorhens and coots kind of ruffling through the reed beds. Sometimes you get sparrows or blue tits in the tops of the reeds. Very recently, we had the exciting visitor of a Chetty's warbler. But in the wider landscape from Devon Wildlife Trust perspective, how important is water in the landscape?
Water is incredibly important in the wider landscape. You only need to look at a pond in this time of year or a lake and see the swarms of insects swirling around it and all the flocks of birds. There might be swallows or house martins or a whole range of others that live off that water. Then you can look at the dragonflies and you can look at the things, the many species that live within those water bodies. And we've lost so many of those water bodies across our wider landscape. So ponds like these are hugely important.
So our staff appreciate having the large ponds at work on site here. But is it the kind of thing that people can do in their own garden? And what are the key things people need to do when digging a pond to attract wildlife and biodiversity into their garden?
Well, it's always worth having a pond in your garden if you can have the space for it. And a lot of people say the single most easiest way to bring wildlife back to your garden is to have a pond. That and leaving areas unmown, as we were talking about earlier. And ponds can be any size. I think two key things about ponds: keep them shallow, or the edges shallow. What you don't want is steep-sided ponds, because a lot of the species will live in those shallows and will want to creep in and out of the pond, and they can't do that if it's got a steep side. It's not a bad idea to have a deep bit in the middle, because that will help things over winter, but shallow edges really important. And the other things, don't mow right round the edge of the pond. Keep some nice long vegetation around the edge of the pond. That's really important habitat for a lot of species. And try not to have too much shade, because if there's good sunlight, you'll get far more wildlife on that pond.
So as the representative of Devon Wildlife Trust, what is your vision for the future? And how can large gardens, such as the Met Office, and small gardens that people have at home, contribute to the biodiversity in the UK?
Well, we've got a big challenge in the UK. We need to double the area of wildlife habitat that we've got. And that may sound like a tall order, but it's perfectly possible. We would still have less wildlife habitat than an awful lot of our European neighbours if we do that. But this is what we need to do if we want to hold on to the wildlife we've got. And all of us can play a role in that, but companies and organisations like the Met Office have a hugely important role to play. So somewhere between 15 and 20% of land is owned by private companies and organisations like the Met Office. A lot of it is built upon, but a lot of it is just held for future investment, possible development, or as buffer land. And there's an awful lot of, should I call it, wasted space in our country, which could be managed in a different way and achieve a whole lot more for wildlife and the natural environment. So what I'd really love to push organisations like the Met Office to do, and obviously you're doing a great job with this already, but other organisations, would be to say, look at that space and say, what can we do for wildlife here? Because the answer will almost be an awful lot more than what we're doing at the moment.
Harry, thank you ever so much for coming along today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's been a delight to come along, and congratulations on all you've done and on your 10th anniversary of your Biodiversity Benchmark Award, and I just hope that lots of other people out there will follow the lead and example you've set.
Thank you very much. For the rest of this video, we would like to show you some video and images taken from the site at Exeter Met Office.